My name is Creaby-Attwood, and this is a podcast about design and employee reward systems. In this particular podcast, we're going to talk about the issues of external competitiveness and the effect of the external environment and the way in which organisations want to respond to that, the effect that has upon the design choices that organisations can make, and about the techniques and technologies that can be used to assist organisations to take account of these external issues. So we've got a very broad structure for this podcast. A number of issues impact upon the externally facing issues surrounding the design of reward systems. And so we're going to deal with these in a variety of different ways. The range of factors that influence organisations, that organisations need to respond to, can be identified down the left-hand side of the screen here. So we start with the most obvious, labour market factors. When we're setting wages, when we're deciding upon the levels of reward that we want to advertise ourselves with to the labour market, we're effectively setting a price for labour. In many ways, like setting a price for any other goods or service that we might produce as an organisation. But here is a price for labour. And so we need to understand a little bit about the way that labour markets operate, and here about the way in which demand and supply in labour markets functions. Of course, labour market issues on their own are by no means the whole story, because organisations are effectively buyers of labour in labour markets, and so their ability to buy is constrained by their success in other markets, in product markets specifically. So the ability of organisations to set a price, to take a price within labour markets depends upon their success in product markets, how wealthy they are, how much they can afford. And so an awful lot of organisations' operation within labour markets is determined by their success in product markets, about the level of competition that they face for their goods and services, effectively how much they are able to absorb in terms of labour market costs, and also how much they're able to pass on to their own customers. So those product market factors interact with labour market factors in terms of setting the context of organisations in respect of setting a price for labour. The third key set of factors when we're considering these issues of external competitiveness are those that are bound up with the particular nature of organisations. And organisations differ between themselves. There are key differences in the way that different industries might approach these issues of external competitiveness. The different industries will be more or less competitive for different types of labour. There are differences between organisations depending on their size. Big organisations against small organisations. And there are differences between organisations based on strategic choice. So these key sets of factors are the first things that we're going to consider, because these set the context, the immediate context, the external context that organisations need to respond to in terms of determining these reward choices in relation to the level of competitiveness that they want to achieve through their reward systems. So, in order to respond to these pressures, organisations need to make a policy. They need to make a decision. They can identify the nature of their environment through making sense of how the labour market works, their product market position, their various organisational characteristics. But the response will be characterised by a pay policy. And working towards this pay policy is the key issue in terms of organisations determining their approach towards external competitiveness. And so we will consider the range of pay policy choices that are open to organisations, traditional match, lead or lag policies, and some more recent developments, flexible employer choice, shared choices, those kinds of approaches that organisations can take. In order to determine what the right pay policy is, and of course this has to be determined in very precise detail, this isn't a kind of general approach that organisations take, because it needs to be translated into a reward structure. Ultimately, organisations need to take account of specific market intelligence. They need to know how labour markets and product markets that they are tapping into are developing. And so the identification of market intelligence is a key aspect of organisations and their determination of their stance towards the external environment. And so we'll be looking at the nature of pay surveys, about what they do and what they don't do, and about the various choices that organisations might have in putting together a pay survey. And we'll also be thinking about how we can interpret this intelligence, about how we analyse pay surveys in order to provide a kind of summary, if you like, of what the market is doing, because pay surveys generate enormous complexities of information, and organisations have to simplify this somehow, and this is typically done through the generation of market pay lines. And so we'll look at how that's done and how we interpret these kinds of analyses. The final part of what we'll talk about today is about how we take that competitive stance through the generation of pay policy choices and combine it with our internal structures, things that we've looked at in previous podcasts. We've looked at internal relativities of pay between employees within a particular organisation, an internal stance as opposed to this external stance, and about how we can combine these internal measures of the job structure with this external information of the market rates and the pay policy taken towards those market rates. And so we'll think about how that influences pay structure choices and how that gets translated into a fully fledged pay structure, either through a grades and ranges approach or perhaps through a bands and zones approach. So this is the structure of what we're going to talk about in this podcast here today. So we start by thinking about the nature of labour markets. Labour markets are absolutely crucial, obviously, in terms of identifying an external competitive stance for organisations. And as I mentioned a moment ago, labour markets are like other markets. We have buyers and sellers, and the interaction of buyers and sellers is what determines prices, broadly speaking, in a market. Now, we can have all kinds of different markets, quoted price markets or a market like a bourse, but the key issue, regardless of the particular nature of the market, is about how buyers and sellers interact, and specifically about how buyers and sellers in the marketplace strike a deal. That is, how they reach a mutually acceptable price, in this case for labour, but for any good or service that is within that market. It's about how buyers and sellers find that point that is mutually acceptable, where the price isn't too high for the buyer and the price isn't too low for the seller. It's about how that interaction takes place, and that's the nature of how prices are set. And so we need to understand the behaviour of those actors, of buyers and sellers. And in order to understand their behaviour, we need to simplify some issues, and typically the operation of labour markets and the way in which economists understand the operation of labour markets is achieved by simplifying some of the behaviours that we see. And those assumptions are generally considered to be these. We assume that employers will act within labour markets in order to maximise profits, so that we can understand what the motivation of buyers of labour might be. And conversely, that potential employees will seek to maximise their return for their labour, that people are acting in a rationally economic way. We also assume that there's not a great deal of variability in the quality of labour. So we're looking at a market for a certain type of labour, and of course in the real world we have good employees, good potential employees, mediocre potential employees, and poor employees. But we can't introduce those kind of individual aspects in our understanding of the operation of whole markets, because we're dealing with masses of people. And so we assume that people are homogeneous, that they're interchangeable, and so this kind of individual difference between people in that marketplace isn't an issue, otherwise it becomes far too complex. We also assume that markets are competitive, that everybody is trying to achieve their best potential outcome. So those are the kind of parameters that we're operating with generally in terms of our understanding of how labour markets work. Now, in terms of understanding the setting of a price in a labour market, we can draw it as a simple demand-supply curve. So in this example here, we might look at a graduate labour market, and we can plot on the horizontal axis the numbers of graduates that might be available to employers who want to buy their labour at various different prices, and the prices are indicated on the vertical axis. So we can see the graduate pay might vary from, say, 15,000 to 35,000 as a starting salary, and that varying numbers of graduates will be available, will make themselves available for work in different numbers according to the rate of pay available. And we can draw a simple demand curve. In this case, it's a straight line. This is an example. So we can see that this is a demand curve. So this is looking at it from the point of view of employers, of the buyers for labour. And we can think about the numbers of graduates who would be employed, whose labour would be bought at different rates of pay. So if we look at the top left-hand side of the demand curve, we can see that at £35,000, 100 graduates would secure work, whereas at the right, lower end of the demand curve, a much greater number, more than twice that number of graduates would be offered work at the lower rate of pay at £15,000. So that tells us something about the operation of the labour market from the point of view of the employer, of the people who are buying labour. What about from the point of view of the sellers of labour, from the graduates themselves? Now, clearly, we're assuming that people are rational economic beings, and so they are looking to achieve a different kind of outcome. The interests involved are reversed. So here we've got graduates who are looking to maximise their returns on their labour. They want to earn more for their work rather than less. And so there will be relatively fewer graduates available for work at the lower rate of pay, the bottom left-hand side of the graph, whereas at the top right-hand side of the graph, there'll be many. All of the graduates will put themselves available at £35,000 a year. That's not unusual. What this helps us to do, though, is to help us understand about how buyers and sellers, in collective terms, interact. And we can see where these supply and demand curves meet, and where we can identify a clearing price in this market for labour. So we can identify where these demand and supply curves intersect. That gives us the market rate of pay. So just looking at the labour market issues, we can see in this fictional example, £22,000 provides us with that point where the supply and demand curves intersect. Now that gives us some useful information. It tells us about how buyers and sellers across the board in markets, in particular labour markets, might be operating, about how that behaviour, about how that interaction is taking place. But that's not the end of the story, because obviously there is a lot of complexity in there, and there are a lot of things going on that aren't simply explained by a rather straightforward demand-supply curve. So sometimes knowing what the market rate is isn't always incredibly helpful in terms of identifying for organisations how they should pitch their particular competitive stance. So there are a number of situations that we might want to consider. For example, there may be situations where labour markets are very, very tight, where there are very low levels of unemployment. Now, in that kind of situation, because really what you're talking about is simply frictional levels of unemployment, people only start looking for work, they're kind of moving in between organisations, which makes the labour market much more sticky, much less fluid, because we're in a situation where virtually everybody that wants to work is working. And so if organisations start trying to respond to the need for labour by raising prices, raising wages, that is, a little bit above what they see as the current market rate, because you're having to attract people out of their existing job, that may not have the desired effect, because the labour market is quite sticky. We know that people, if they're settled in a job, there's a reluctance to change. So in circumstances of very low unemployment, simply raising wages above what we perceive as the current market rate might not actually do very much in terms of providing us as an employer with the desired level of labour supply. So low unemployment creates differences in the way that labour markets operate. It makes them much more sticky, and they don't respond in the kind of fluid way that a simple demand and supply curve might suggest. A similar kind of situation occurs in more specific situations, say in a local labour market where you have a single big employer. And this has a similar effect to low unemployment across a broader labour market. So on the one hand, if you are that single big employer that is dominant in a particular labour market, that does provide you with certain advantages. It means that you can effectively set the price, the going rate in that particular market. But in doing so, you're kind of effectively sucking up all of the local labour. So you can set the market rate, but if you require further supplies of labour, which means that you have to go beyond your local labour market, that attracting people from further afield might be a much more difficult prospect than it otherwise would be, because you have to entice people from far away, people maybe from an entirely different labour market. So your operation may be out of line with what is happening in the areas where you need to attract labour from. So again, knowledge of the market rate and the market rate that you operate in may lead you to becoming unstuck when that labour market becomes depleted, when you need labour from a different source, a different labour market, and you're working on a different set of parameters, and you find yourself in a position of having to respond to those different kinds of situations. The other thing, a more general point about playing around with this labour market knowledge and about using labour market rates to kind of increase or lower demand for employees and so on, is that you aren't an independent actor in that labour market, or rather, everybody else is also an independent operator within that labour market. So if you see your need to attract additional labour within the labour market, and you think, okay, in order to do that, I will raise my price, I'll raise the wages and become more attractive to employees who are available in that labour market. Of course, there's nothing to stop your competitors following suit. And if you are all working in the same kind of competitive context, all that you effectively do is to raise the market rate without actually improving your supply of labour. And you could say, well, that's simply an operation of tightening or loosening of labour market pressures generally. So if we leave labour markets in themselves to one side for now, the second set of factors that organisations will need to be aware of in terms of how they interact with those labour markets is the effect of product markets. And the reason why product markets are so important is because of the particular nature of labour, of people's ability to work, and the value of that ability to work for organisations. Because whilst I've been saying that in many ways labour markets and setting a price for labour in labour markets is like setting the price of other commodities in other markets, there is also quite a big difference. And the big difference is about the way in which labour provides value for organisations. If you buy a commodity, if I buy a computer, and I know its price, I shop around and find the best price for that product, but then the product in itself retains some value. So if I want to sell it again in a year's time, it will have a certain amount of residual value that I can sell on, and I can take those factors into account when I'm thinking about my purchase at the outset. The purchase of labour is very different. Firstly, in most cases, there's no sell-on aspect because this isn't slavery, this is about employment, and also because the kind of value that we generate from labour, from our employees, is only ever potential. We can't guarantee it. So we might think as employers that we need to employ a certain range of people with a certain level of skill, and that will be a competitively advantageous act for us to undertake. But we're taking a risk. We don't know, firstly, whether the employment of any particular employee will work out. Will it be any good? Will it not? Will they work hard? Will they not? Will their skills be right or not? Are we making the right judgments? Will they be managed correctly? Will we provide them with the right kinds of resources that will allow them to translate their potential value into actual value? So we're paying money in the labour market and hoping that investment will actually be realised in product markets. So we're taking a risk. And we've got to think about the fact that if we don't replace the money that we spend on people's wages, or we don't anticipate that, then we can't take on those staff in the first place. So our understanding of how labour markets operate and the way in which employers interact with potential employees in labour markets is pretty much defined by the relationship that we must also try and understand between product and labour markets. They're in a relationship, and the ability of organisations to operate in their product markets, how successful they are in doing their basic business, the goods, services that they sell in those product markets, their success in product markets effectively sets a maximum that firms can afford to pay. How successful they are in product markets predetermines the way in which they can operate within labour markets. Because one way or another, spending money in labour markets requires organisations to pass on the cost of that activity to their customers in product markets. Now, of course, some organisations are much better placed to be able to do this than others. So if an organisation is operating in a product market with relatively little competition, or even better, if they're in a monopoly, then they have substantial scope to operate in whichever way they please in labour markets. They can pay good wages, they can take on many staff, they can operate a very slack staffing policy, all kinds of things they can afford to do. Those pressures aren't there because the competition in the product markets isn't present. Conversely, if an organisation operates in extremely tight, competitive product markets, then their ability to act in labour markets will be extremely constrained. So the tighter the competition in product markets, the more intense the impact and more intense the cost pressures are for employers in terms of their operation in labour markets. The final set of factors which determines the external competitive context of organisations are about particular organisational factors. So, if we look at the way that different types of organisations operate in terms of their external competitive context, we know that some industries pay more than others. Labour-intensive industries tend to pay less than technology-intensive industries. And, we can think of some very obvious examples like textile, food production, those kinds of things, personal services industries, very labour-intensive industries that tend to pay much less than technology-intensive industries like the high-tech sector, creative industries, those kinds of firms. So all industries aren't the same. And the particular nature of the industry and the capital labour mix within a particular industry will be an important factor in determining the nature of the context in which an organisation is operating, and hence the kind of choices that they're able to make. Similar kinds of factors are apparent in terms of the size of organisations. All of the things being equal, we tend to find that big firms will pay more than small firms, by and large. And again, that's not much of a surprise. The final organisational factor is more about choice and less about structure, because some organisations will make a deliberate decision that they will think about the nature of their competitive situation and think about the kinds of competitive strategies that will provide them with some kind of advantage in their particular environment, and part of their strategic decision making might involve deliberate decisions about pay levels. So it may be that an organisation believes that it needs to offer particularly attractive rewards for their employees in order to keep the best staff, to retain people, to have people with the best skills, the most highly motivated, to have commitment, whatever it might be. But the deliberate choices that organisations make, which might differ from one organisation to another, might also be an important factor that organisations consider in terms of making sense of their competitive context. So if those are the broad sets of factors, labour market issues, product market issues, and organisational factors, where does this lead organisations? What can they do? How do they respond to their context? Well, typically we think about the nature of an organisation's response to these various factors in terms of the pay policy that they might set. The organisation is rather than acting in a kind of ad hoc way, responding to events as they emerge, they're taking a deliberate policy towards their external environment in terms of the rewards that they're setting. And traditionally, the kinds of pay policies that we would see organisations make in respect to their external environment would be three. The first being a match policy. And here, organisations would look at what the market rates were, or the rates of pay across the board in their particular labour market or markets, and simply match them, to seek to hit that point where the market was operating. Now, this kind of match pay policy, well, you could say that it offers certain kinds of advantages for organisations, but in a sense, these advantages are simply the absence of disadvantages. So what you're doing by operating a match policy is not falling behind your competitors. You are neither less attractive to potential employees, but neither are you more attractive to potential employees. You would probably avoid a great deal of dissatisfaction amongst your workforce, but neither, again, would you achieve a great deal of positive satisfaction. And in terms of labour costs, again, you'd be matching your labour costs to the kinds of costs that your competition will be having to bear as well. So it's a kind of neutral policy. You're saying, okay, well, this is our market. These are the people that we need. These are our competitors. Let's go down the middle and let's kind of hit what other people are doing. And maybe you see, your competitive advantage coming in other ways, and that you don't need to distinguish yourself in relation to pay policy. And so the match policy is about hitting the market slap bang in the middle. Alternatively, some organisations may take a lead pay policy. And this is about being ahead of that mid-range market price. You're seeking more positive, more aggressive advantages from your pay policy. You're trying to be particularly attractive in the labour market so that you can pick and choose from the people who want to work for you. You can pick the best, the people who you think are going to do the best job for you, be the most productive, be the most creative, be whatever it is that you want them to be, because you have that ability to demand for employment in your organisation because you are the best payer. And that might not be the only reason that people come and work for an organisation, but it certainly doesn't harm that kind of approach. We do see in the literature as well that the organisations that operate lead policies do have some distinct advantages. We see that organisations that operate lead policies tend to have lower labour turnover. They tend to have lower rates of absenteeism, and of course that in themselves provides some particular advantages for organisations. The third of those traditional pay policies is a lag policy, and of course if a match is hitting the market rate and lead is leading the market rate, then we know what lag is already. It's operating below or at the bottom end of rates of pay in a particular labour market, and generally would be regarded as an undesirable state to be in, an undesirable pay policy, something that you don't choose to do, but something you might not have any choice over. So when we were talking about product market pressures, if an organisation is in an extremely competitive product market, cost pressure is very high, they may feel that they have very little choice but to operate a lag policy. And of course this leads an organisation to be less attractive. It means that the choices that they have in who they can employ become quite constrained. It may be that they can only get employees who don't want to work for anybody else. So generally undesirable, and with those kinds of choices of less attractive employees comes, perhaps consequences in terms of lower productivity, lower commitment, higher turnover, higher absenteeism, all kinds of nasties, all kinds of undesirable outcomes. It's not always the case, and sometimes organisations that operate a lag policy might overcome those disadvantages through a range of different approaches, which we'll talk about in more detail in a moment. So those are the traditional pay policies that we've seen organisations operate, the three responses to an organisation's competitive environment. More recently, we've seen organisations adopt a range of different approaches to pay policies. First thing we've seen is organisations to adopt multiple policy positions. So, in detail, we see organisations offering different pay policies to different job families within their organisation. Now, the reason for this is because they may see that a single pay policy across a large or very diverse organisation may be too constraining, that an organisation might operate in a variety of different labour markets and face a variety of different labour market pressures, and so it would make little sense to respond to all of those different labour market pressures with a single pay policy. And so those multiple pay policies might mean that for certain job families where labour markets are very tight, very competitive, that they offer a lead policy so that they can attract staff in that kind of situation. But in other labour markets, in other areas of their staffing, where the labour markets are much looser, that they can be much more competitive and operate a match or a lag policy. So organisations become much more flexible in terms of their approaches towards pay policies. Now, of course, if you're doing this, this runs into potential problems in terms of the internal comparisons that employees might make. We talked in a previous session about the way in which employees will naturally compare their earnings and their contribution to the organisation from the point of view of equity. And of course, Adam's equity theory is very important in relation to this. Now, that capacity for employees to compare doesn't go away just because we've decided that we're going to operate multiple pay policy positions. So if an organisation is going to go down this route, it's very important that they consider the impact on the internal context of the organisation and the internal context of the pay structure that results. And typically, if you were in this position, you'd want to limit the extent to which employees typically would compare themselves with different job families that would have a different pay policy approach to their own. So that discreteness between different job families would be something that you would hope to see to limit the capacity or limit the natural comparison of employees with others, where those pay policies might provide a source of demotivation or dissatisfaction. Another way of achieving the same kind of outcome would be through some system of outsourcing. So, you may feel that what you're doing is responding to a kind of inflexible pay policy position, and having multiple policy positions certainly does that. But one other way of achieving the same kind of outcome is to effectively move the problem to somebody else. So an area where you don't want to be so competitive because labour markets are slack or whatever, you outsource that area. Those people effectively then become an employees of another organisation. You achieve the flexibility in costs for your own organisation, and you don't have the problem of internal comparison because those people aren't internal anymore. And so outsourcing may be seen as an alternative approach to this. Another thing that we've seen organisations doing in relation to their pay policy position is, rather than looking at the headline rates of pay, is to emphasise the reward mix. And this is what I was referring to on the previous slide, that organisations sometimes might operate a lag policy on their base pay, but they make up for this unattractive element by emphasising some of the more competitive or more attractive elements of the package as a whole. And sometimes we see, particularly startups, and particularly startups in areas where they need high levels of skill amongst their initial workforce, like in the high-tech sector and the creative industries. And they could never attract people on the basis of base pay because they simply don't have the money to operate an attractive lead policy at that point. But maybe they can sweeten the mix in other ways, maybe by offering share options, stock options, which may be much more attractive to those employees over a longer period of time. So it becomes an issue of understanding the reward package as a whole, rather than simply about just looking at base pay and attaching your market position to that. And we can go even further than that by looking at so-called employer of choice approaches, which doesn't just look at those specific reward elements, but to highlight all of the returns on employment for a potential employee. So what are the career development opportunities. What's it like to work in this organisation? What's the culture of the place? Things that make up an overall package that may be incredibly attractive to a particular set of employees, even in a situation where pay or rewards themselves are not so attractive. The final approach that we've seen organisations take in extending these pay policy approaches is by drilling down, almost moving away from the idea of responding to a market as a whole and thinking about employees as individuals. We may find that we can effectively ignore the market and ignore market rates and not have to think about pay policies at all if we can identify specific employees that we want to come and work for us and then respond to their specific desires. So that this is like taking the employer of choice approach, but then applying it individually, so that you respond to the specific wants of individual employees, not broad masses of people within a marketplace, but what do you as an individual value, and can you respond to that? Can you make an individual package of rewards for individual employees so that you're responding to people rather than markets? And this provides, obviously, organisations with the ultimate amount of flexibility in terms of how they set pay policy. Although, of course, it brings an awful lot of complexity and other potential disadvantages along there. And this is the kind of thing that we've seen through organisations adopting various types of cafeteria schemes, where we allow employees to tailor their own rewards. So these are the kinds of things that we've seen organisations do in relation to the external environment. Of course, you can only do that if you have sufficient market intelligence, because each one of these pay policies isn't a kind of general desire. It might start out like that, but it has to be translated into something much more specific. So if we're going to operate a lead policy, or a match policy, or a lag policy, or whatever kind of policy we want, that has to be translated into actual numbers. It has to translate into facts and figures, and so we need to know exactly what the market is doing so that we can apply our policy choice to it and then cost the implications of that. And so we start to gather and generate market data, market intelligence. Now, the key issue in any kind of pay survey is about identifying appropriate benchmarks. And this is the foundation of virtually any pay survey that we come across. And the key issue with a benchmarking approach is to look at the people that we want in our organisation, the people that we got in our organisation. What are the range of jobs? What are the ranges of skill? What are the range of whatever it is that we want to match against? And then find appropriate benchmark jobs in a survey in order to match against. Now, of course, the best way to do this is to construct a kind of bespoke survey for our own organisation. But most organisations don't have the resources to do that. And so you're in a situation where you're having to take an off-the-shelf pay survey and then try and figure out where the survey data touches your own job structure. So where do the people who are being described and levels of pay of jobs within a survey that are being described, where do they hit the jobs that you have in your organisation? Now, this is more difficult than it sounds, because organisations develop their job structure over time. Jobs develop, jobs change their meaning and importance and scope over time. And so even jobs within your organisation that match a job with exactly the same name in a survey may be entirely different things, because organisations go off on their own, in their own directions, and their jobs develop in different ways. So when these are all brought back together within a survey, it becomes very difficult to kind of match up. Well, when this survey describes an administrator, is that administrator the same as our administrator? And the only way that you can do that is to kind of drill down into the descriptive data. So we can look at, well, what does an administrator do in our organisation? And what does an administrator in this survey do? And usually these surveys will classify types of jobs using a kind of generic title. And the task then is to see where your kinds of jobs in your organisation fit into the generic job title within the survey. And it's not always perfect. In fact, it's very rarely perfect. Probably the best kind of outcome would be if you've used a generic job evaluation tool, like Hey or whatever, and you find a survey that has been constructed around jobs which use the same evaluation tool. And so you know that what you're looking at is matched through those kind of more detailed criteria, but it's still not straightforward. So our broad benchmark approach is kind of the first stumbling block for anybody trying to make sense of what's going on in their particular labour markets. We also see a range of different issues that crop up in surveys which affect different kinds of organisations with different types of jobs in mind in different ways. And we can look at different types of surveys which help organisations respond to these particular issues. So, for example, it might be that in some industries the rates of pay for a specific job are not the be-all and end-all. That's not the kind of key thing that you might want to know. There may be other issues. Particularly, you might be very interested in the level of experience of particular employees and how that impacts upon different rates of pay at different levels for those kinds of employees. So this global approach that we see here on the left of the slide provides us with the ability to do that, where it tracks not just the diversity in rates of pay in different segments of a particular labour market, but also distinguishes by the length of time that those types of employees have had in their careers. So, for example, if you're in engineering, you may be employing engineers who all have certain types of qualifications, but experience, the knowledge that somebody has been around for 20 years may be the key issue for you. You want safe, experienced hands in your organisation. So you need to know how much somebody like that, with that degree of experience, is likely to cost. And so therefore how to price your own particular system. So you need that kind of information. There may be other situations as well where it becomes very difficult to match in the way that I've described in the benchmark approach. And this is particularly the case where you may have a skill-based structure. So you've decided that it makes sense for your organisations to distinguish internally between employees based on skills or competence or whatever. And then you need to think about, well, how do we price people like that? How do we price those skills? Because pay surveys typically will be based around the price of jobs rather than skills, and certainly not the skills that you may have identified within your particular scheme. So how do you do it? Well, the low-high approach, which is identified here on the right of the slide, provides a, albeit crude, way of doing that. And what you would do would be to look at maybe snapshots, little segments of your pay structure, and distinguish at the one end of the scale a job which represents the least skilled of that part of your structure and the most skilled of that part of your structure, and then use those examples as kind of anchor points to then go out to a pay survey to price them in terms of salary, and then to use that as a range along which you can fit all of the other people within that particular bit of your skill-based structure. Like I say, it's pretty crude, but until surveys start to appear with the level of detail of skill in them, as opposed to the job description-based approach that we see currently, then there's a precious little alternative to that kind of low-high approach. Other issues within surveys. It may be that you attempt to do a benchmarking and simply find that the job that you are looking for, that you're trying to match a particular job in your organisation, and that there isn't a match in the survey. And so then you find maybe that you're stuck and that you don't have a way of pricing that particular kind of job. And this is particularly the case where you have very unusual jobs or jobs that have a range of different characteristics. And so the way of approaching this kind of problem is to adopt a so-called market basket approach. And the market basket approach works like this. So we start off by identifying a range of jobs within the survey that you're looking at that have some relevance to the job that you're trying to price. So there are various elements of this particular job which crop up in various survey jobs. So job 1, job 2 and job 3 here. And then you identify to what extent these survey jobs, these elements of survey jobs represents or matches the job within your organisation that you're trying to match. So, for example here, job 3 is the kind of biggest portion of this job in our organisation, followed by job 2 and job 1. That there are characteristics of these survey jobs that are present in these different, to this different extent within this job within your organisation. And then you price those jobs. So you identify the rates of pay for those related survey jobs, and you do a multiplication of the rates of pay multiplied by the proportion of that survey job in your job, and then you do a quick addition of those various elements. So we can see that the rate for survey job 1 is about 23,500, but that only accounts for a fifth of your job, and so that equates to 4,700, and so on through job 2 and job 3. We add them all together, and that gives us an overall rate for that job. Although we might also want to think that, well, perhaps this job, because it's a unique set of jobs, which set of characteristics, which maybe makes the job holder more valuable, and so therefore it should attract maybe a premium. And so we calculate what that premium might be because of the uniqueness of this job, and we add it onto the bottom, giving us an overall market rate of pay for this job. Now you can start to see, in a variety of different examples here, that adopting a market rate for jobs in your organisation is not straightforward, and it's very far from scientific. And what we're talking about generally is an estimate. It's something that gives us an idea of the kind of rate that might be relevant for jobs in the organisation. It's certainly not a scientific approach, but it gives us ballpark figures, no more than that. What else might we need to know within the survey? Well, one of the things that we talked about in terms of looking at pay policy choices was the fact that base pay may well not be the end of the story. So, we may look at doing a pay survey for these various jobs in our organisation, job 1, job 2, through to 7. And if we simply track on base, it gives us a certain kind of outcome. It gives us an idea about the relative value of those jobs out in the marketplace. But we might want to do different comparisons. So it might be that we are interested in not just base, but also bonus as well, which we categorise as total cash rewards, base plus bonus. And that gives us an outcome which is a similar kind of shape, maybe, but it certainly means that it gives us a more informed view about what the total cash returns for this job might be in the marketplace. We might also look again and say, well, okay, what about all of the rewards for these jobs? It's not just cash, not just base and bonus, but what about the rewards that might be available for jobs like this in the marketplace that include share options and also include benefits? Now here, not only are we getting a different level of rewards across the board, but we're seeing some real divergence. So once we get past, say, job 4 here in this example, we start to see that the impact of including share options and benefits in our market analysis tells us that the marketplace is very different to what it would look like simply based on total cash or even just on base pay. So in terms of our information, in terms of our market intelligence, widening the range of rewards that we seek intelligence of provides us with increasing amounts of detail that we can bring to bear in terms of our comparisons. Another thing that we need to think about in terms of our survey is not just what we measure, but who we measure from. And there are important considerations to take in terms of the sources of data, not really who we get our survey from, but who the survey information is based upon, and how we sift through that data to make sure that we've got information which is relevant to us. Because, like I mentioned near the beginning of the podcast, all organisations are not equal, and they differ substantially in terms of their rewards based on various characteristics. So, if we are a small concern, we wouldn't be very wise making our comparison to the market leader, unless we have a very, very aggressive and realistic expansion strategy that we think is going to allow us to be able to compete with those kinds of organisations straight away. So when we're looking at the data from the survey, we need to know something about the company sizes and structures of information that's contained within it, so that we can identify data that relates to organisations of a similar size and structure to our own. We need to think about financial metrics like turnover and profitability, so that we are, making sense of data in a way which is meaningful to our own organisation. So once we've collected that data, what do we do with it? Well, like most data of this type, we need to analyse it in a variety of statistical ways. The first thing that we might look at are the frequency distributions of the data, simply to see whether the data is essentially normal, or is it strange in some ways, it's skewed towards one end or another. Are there large numbers of outliers which make this data suspect in some way, or is there a nice normal distribution curve which makes us feel good about the reliability of the data? So we might plot a distribution curve like this. Then we need to try and figure out, well, what does this tell us about what's going on in the market, and what is the market rate? And we might typically do this by looking at some measures of central tendency. So we might look at the mode, as the most popular rate of pay, or we may look at the mean, the average, which is often regarded as a good indicator of where the market is, or maybe we look at the median as the middle point. The market rate itself might be around any one of these measures, and again, this isn't a scientific approach, it's a sense of playing with these figures and thinking about what looks like the best reading of the market, and some of this is about art and judgment rather than a hard scientific measure. The other thing that we might do with this data is to think about not just the measure of central tendency, but also about the distribution of the market data around whichever measure of central tendency we've decided to use. Now, typically in statistics, we look at this distribution as a standard deviation, but that's not usual practice. In reward, normally in reward, we look at distribution through quartiles or centiles, so that we make sense of what's going on in a particular marketplace by looking at where the cut-off points, say the 25th centile, so we can see what the bottom quartile of the market might be, or at the 50th, at the 75th, and so on. So we can see where the various bits of the market are operating. Another thing which is very important not to miss in terms of making sense of survey data is to recognise that survey data is always historical. It's always outdated because it was collected in the past, and we're going to use it in the future. And so in order to keep that data current and to make sure that we're not applying old market data to future pay systems, we need to apply some kind of trend increase to take account of the period in time between when the data was collected and when we're going to implement our scheme. And so we look at broad labour market measures in order to identify an appropriate trend uplift to the survey data before we apply it to the design of our reward scheme. So, how does this work out? So we have our approach towards our market. What do we do with that? How do we apply these ideas to an actual organisation? How do we eventually get from that to the construction of a pay structure? So we start with our internal job structure, which we've prepared previously. And we've identified all the jobs in our organisation, and we've identified how many job evaluation points each one of those jobs attracts. And we can see that on this diagram here with the job evaluation points going along the horizontal axis. Now, out of all of the jobs in our organisation, we would typically want to sample a number of jobs, not all of them, particularly if our organisation was quite large. We would want to sample some from the bottom, some from the middle, and some from the top of every discrete structure that we are going to have in place. So if we have if we intend to have a job and pay structure which includes all of the jobs in the organisation, then we take a few jobs from the bottoms, a few from the middle, a few from the top from those jobs. If we are going to have multiple structures, then we need to do the same for each structure and apply them to the relevant labour market. We would typically want to have a minimum of 2 jobs from the bottom, 2 jobs from the middle, and 2 jobs from the top to make sure that we don't get any errors or significant errors having an extreme impact upon the survey data that we collect. So we identify a range of sample jobs that are representative of all of the jobs in our organisation, however we have divided them up. And so then we price them using our pay survey. We match the sample jobs to the jobs in the survey as best we can, and we identify what the rates of pay for those jobs might be. And we plot them. And we identify a nice ziggy-zaggy line. Now this is effectively our market line. But the problem that we have is that if we try and apply this to all of the other jobs in our organisation, we get all kinds of inconsistencies because the line isn't straight, and it's not curvilinear, it's ziggy-zaggy line, and it goes up and down and round about because of all of the inconsistencies that we've talked about. Inconsistencies in matching, inconsistencies between organisations, inconsistencies in the operation of labour markets in different places at different points in time. And so if we apply it as such, we'll end up with a pay structure which is literally all over the place. So we need to make sense of this zigzag line, and we need to reduce it. We need to apply a regression to this data so that we reduce the divergence of these market pay points, and we identify a nice, clean, linear relationship between job valuation points on the one hand and market salary on the other. Now, the extent to which this regression is reliable depends upon just how much of a zigzag there is in our original data. That is, how much divergence around that line there happens to be. And we can make a judgment about how good this regression is based on the R-squared score that we get when we do the regression calculation. Obviously, a perfect regression relationship would be an R-squared of 1. Anything less than 0.7 would be unacceptable. So hopefully we have a nice clear regression, and we can identify from that this regression line becomes, for our purposes, the market pay line, which then allows us to take all of the jobs in the organisation, not just the sample jobs, but every job in between all of those sample jobs, and plot up from the job evaluation points that those jobs have been scored at, and then across to a salary level, which gives us a representation or an approximation of what the market rate of pay should be for each one of those jobs in our organisation, based on the idea that we have calculated the job evaluation points correctly, and that we've chosen our sample properly, and that we've benchmarked our sample jobs to the survey jobs effectively, and that our regression is good enough. Obviously, the way in which any one of those factors, might be off in a varying degrees, would reduce the reliability of that market pay line and reduce the effectiveness, reduce the approximation of market pay for each one of those jobs. Now, of course, if we want to operate a lead pay policy, then we can push the policy line upwards. If we want to operate a lag pay policy, we can push the policy line down, and we can again read off what the rates of pay might be, operating different types of pay policies. Now, of course, this can lead us into all kinds of difficulties and all kinds of perverse outcomes. So, for example, here, where we have a lag pay policy, down towards the bottom end of the job structure, in the bottom 1 or 2 jobs in our job structure, attracting around 20 job evaluation points, it looks, based on our market analysis, like those jobs shouldn't be paid anything at all, which would be very difficult to advertise for. So we might need to think about taking a more nuanced pay policy approach. So maybe rather than operating a single pay policy, we maybe divide our job structure into 2 and operate different pay policy lines for different job families, and that this provides us with a way of getting around that particular difficulty. So we can use this pay data. Again, it's not a scientific approach, it's data which allows us to make decisions and allows us to translate market intelligence and desire, strategic intent, into something meaningful and useful. So we have market data, and we can identify a market orientation towards that market data. How then do we build a pay structure from this? Well, the first thing that we do is to try and identify how our jobs cluster together, our existing jobs. Because it's one thing to have a market pay line, which allows us to effectively market price approximately any job in our organisation. The problem with doing that is that if you've got a complex organisation, a diverse organisation, that you end up potentially with dozens or hundreds of individual pay rates across the organisation, which becomes quite an administrative burden to operate. It also means that we're not able to discriminate between employees according to the level of performance or the level of experience, say. So we've gone through a range of different steps to identify individual market rates of pay. And now what we have to do is to simplify the picture by banding jobs together in order to get a market range of pay for a range of different jobs, graded together as being sufficiently similar from the point of view of the pay system as a whole. So if this is a simplified scatter graph of all of the jobs in our organisation, with the varying job sizes according to their job valuation points and their rates of pay that they currently attract. And what we need to do is to find clusters of jobs that make sense of being gathered together and treated as effectively the same from the point of view of the pay system. So, for example, if we look at these two jobs here, indicated with the arrows, we can see that, well, they're a long way apart, both in job size and in current level of salary. And so it would probably be quite obvious that these jobs are not going to be kept together within the pay structure. On the other hand, we may look at these jobs and think very similar in job size and almost identical in salary level. Should they be together or should they be separate? And there's no straightforward answer to knowing where the cut-off point should be. Where should the boundary be between one grade of job and the next? So we can use all kinds of tools, and there are computer-assisted tools for helping us work out groupings of jobs in our structure in this way. But ultimately, we need to make a judgment about where those cut-off points should be. And this isn't done in a kind of numerical sense or in any kind of statistical way, but more likely in terms of identifying logical or appropriate cut-off point that makes sense from the point of view of workflow in the organisation, about career paths, so that movement between one job or one grade boundary and the next represents a natural promotion, say, in a particular job family, that groups of staff that you want to cooperate with each other, that maybe they shouldn't have any boundaries between them, or as few boundaries as possible. So we're making judgments, again, based on what we think represents the right kind of structure for our organisation. So we group the jobs together in the way that's illustrated here on this diagram. So once we've done that, we need to translate that into a pay structure. So those groupings of jobs we put together in terms of these grades and ranges, a structure in this diagram here. Now, this is the basic building block of a pay structure. The boxes represent groupings of jobs, and that those groupings of jobs have associated with them a range of pay, a range of rewards that go along with them. Now, the design choices that we make here are very important in terms of determining all kinds of behavioural features within the workforce, and have a huge impact upon the success or otherwise of a reward system, and broader implications in terms of the success of productivity and performance workflow issues throughout the organisation. So we need to think very carefully about how we structure our pay structure in this way, and there are a variety of things that we can play around with. The first thing is to be aware of the features of the pay structure. The grades that we refer to in a grades and ranges pay structure, the grades are about the width of these boxes, about the scope of job valuation points that are enclosed within a particular grade. The ranges represent the gap between the minimum and maximum rates of pay for all of the jobs that are within that particular grade. So every box within your structure will be defined by its width in terms of grade, job valuation point to job valuation point, and by its height, pay level minimum to pay level maximum. Now, the relation of this essentially internal structure to the outside environment, to the external environment that we've been talking about up to this point, is determined by its relationship to the pay policy line. And effectively, we can imagine these various elements of the pay structure, these grades, grade boxes, hanging at their midpoint on our pay policy line of choice. Now, we might have a single pay policy like this, and it might be steeper or shallower, depending on the information that we've taken from the environment and the analysis that we've applied to it. Or we might steepen the relationship between the various grades by having multiple pay policy lines, some lead, some lag, or whatever. And we can play around with the relationship between these grades, play around with the relative hierarchy or egalitarian aspect of the pay structure by attaching these grades to different policy lines in different ways. And the key way to think about the impact of these design choices is to consider the extent of overlap between one grade and the next. So the overlap is determined by the top of one grade and the bottom of the next grade. And the extent of overlap indicates the extent of hierarchy within your structure. So if there's very little overlap, you tend to have a very hierarchical scheme. And as we've talked about in other podcasts, the more hierarchical your scheme, then the more individualistic, more competitive, more performance-driven types of behaviours we get. The greater degree of overlap, quite a lot of overlap in this particular example, then the more egalitarian we might regard our structure as being. And of course, egalitarian schemes are associated with cooperation and other kinds of features that we've talked about in previous podcasts. So we can play around with these features, particularly with the width of grade and with the scope of the pay range, particularly determined by our pay policy choices that we've been talking about. The pay range is usually determined by thinking about the extent of the extent of pay from the midpoint going up to the maximum and down to the minimum. And that gives us another area of variation to play around with in terms of our design choices. So these are this is the end point, if you like. This is the pay structure that we end up with, which effectively represents a coming together of the internal comparisons that we've made through our job valuation or similar kinds of comparisons that we make within the organisation, and the external comparisons that we make between that and the labour markets that we operate within, and the choices that we make towards those labour markets based upon our product market positions and other strategic choices. And we bring them together and determine our pay structure in this way. Now, if we're designing this from scratch, then this is straightforward and this is the end of the story. But most organisations are not doing this from the start. They're inheriting existing rates of pay. And so we may come up with a pay structure which our existing employees don't fit within, at least not all of them. And we may find that some people are underpaid according to our new pay structure. These are the green dots that you can see on the diagram here. People who have previously, in a previous structure, been earning this amount, but according to our current pay structure, our proposed pay structure, should be earning considerably, often considerably more. We also may have some people who are overpaid, who, for no fault of their own, have been on a certain rate of pay, but our new pay structure doesn't provide for those rates of pay. And so we need to make decisions about what we do in each one of these cases. And this is a kind of tidying up exercise, a so-called green circling, red circling exercise. What do we do about people who are underpaid? What do we do about people who are overpaid? And there are a variety of things that we can that we can do to address this in terms of resolving some of those anomalies. The final thing that I want to talk about in this particular podcast is about development beyond that traditional grades and ranges approach. Because one of the criticisms of a grades and range approach is that it can have a tendency to divide people up too much and to reduce the potential for cooperation, because because a grades and range approach has too many boundaries, too many divisions, and doesn't provide potential scope for the kind of team working that's often desired in organisations. And so to resolve some of these issues, organisations have increasingly come up with what's often termed broad-banded pay structures. And broad-banded pay structures are effectively collapsed grade structures. So you take 2 or 3 previous grades with 2 or 3 boundaries between them, and you get rid of the boundaries. And what were 2 or 3 narrow grades become one big, broad band, as in this kind of example here. Now, in doing this, you get rid of the divisions between employees within your structure and potentially increase the scope for cooperation between them. The difficulty of this, of course, comes in that not only have you increased the size of the grades, the width of the box, but you've also increased the range, the pay ranges. Now, typically, if you are an employee within one of these broad bands, then say, for example, you're an employee somewhere near the bottom of band 1 on this diagram here, and you look up at the scope for salary increases up to the maximum of your range, and you think, goodness, there's a long way to go. That's great. Potentially I could be earning 100, 200, 300% more than I'm earning now, simply by sitting tight and rising to the top of my pay range through incremental progression, or maybe through a performance-based increase system, or whatever it might be. Now, this is where the rub comes, because where organisations have introduced broad bands, clearly they're not too keen on the idea that they could have this inflation of labour costs simply through people rising to the top of these enormous pay ranges. So typically what do they do to avoid this? Well, the first thing is that they would almost always avoid the capacity of people to rise to the top of these pay ranges simply through length of service. The benefits of a grade structure, of distinguishing between people who are new or more experienced, that shouldn't apply here, because simply avoiding being fired shouldn't be a good enough reason to get a 200 or 300% increase over time. And so these will typically allow for pay progression based entirely on some performance criteria. The second thing that they do is a neat trick, that rather than having a single range of pay that acts within a particular band, they have so-called shadow ranges, pay zones. which might apply for discrete job families within a particular band. So you look, from the bottom of this pay range in any particular band, and your potential pay progression isn't right to the very top. It's to the top of the little bit, these little T-bars, I-bars are drawn within these bands on the diagram. So in a sense, what you have here is a shadow grades and ranges structure where organisations seek to gain the benefits of bringing together the grades, getting rid of divisions between staff, increasing cooperation, increasing creativity and so on, without having the disadvantage of increased costs as people rise to the top. Some people might say that was having your cake and eat it, but I couldn't possibly comment. Okay, so that's the end of this particular podcast. Thank you for listening, and we'll continue looking at further issues in future podcasts.